The War of 1812. We'd seen that there were several reasons for the War of 1812. The British were seizing our ships on the high seas. They were impressing our sailors. They were kidnapping our sailors and making them serve in the Royal Navy. The British were giving guns to Indians who used those guns to attack settlers on the frontier. And the war hawks in Congress also thought that it would be a good opportunity to take over Canada. So for all of these reasons, by 1812, Congress is ready to declare war. Western and southern states really wanted the war. Western states, especially affected by Indians attacking settlers on the frontier, southern states who saw it as a matter of pride, as a matter of an attack on our nation. Interesting enough, most New England states did not want the war. Remember, New England is basically the commercial, the shipping capital of America, had been ever since Revolutionary War days, because the agriculture there was not suitable for large-scale agricultural uses and making money that way. They chopped down those big forests and made ships. And so you would think that if basically it was your ships that were being attacked and sunk and seized, you would be the ones wanting war. But New England didn't want war. And the reason is that if just one of every 4 ships they sent out returned, it's just one out of every 4 ships they sent out with cargo and stuff to sell returned, having sold their stuff, they still made money. However, in a war against Britain, which had 700 warships, probably the British would establish a blockade along the coast. They would not let out any ships. And if you have no ships going out, you have no ships coming in. No ships going out, no money coming in. So New England thought better a little money coming in than no money coming in. So the House voted 79-49 in favor of war, and the Senate 19-13. Again, most of the opposition against the war came from New England states. So as the war starts, it's also time for a presidential election. After Thomas Jefferson served 2 terms in office, because George Washington only served 2 terms in office, James Madison became president. And Madison was known as the father of our Constitution. He helped write the Constitution. He took careful notes about what everyone said during the Constitutional Convention. And although James Madison, was rather shorter than the average person of the day, his intellect, his knowledge of history and his knowledge of events and his of brain power, so to speak, were known to be very formidable. He was known to be a great intellect at the time. So in 1812 and later 1812, it's time for a presidential election. And Madison wins re-election, which sets a precedent. And the precedent is that no American president who's started the war has ever been kicked out of office during the war. So in 1812, the plan was simple. In 1812, Britain was still fighting Napoleon in Europe, which means most of her ships and almost all of her army was in Europe fighting. The Warhawk scheme had been to conquer Canada. And so the Warhawks and military planners decided on a 3-part invasion of Canada. One group would move north from New York and basically attack Quebec. The capital of Canada, so to speak. Well, of course, at one time it had been the capital of Canada when it was French. It was still sort of known sort of as that sort of the very important city on the hill that was surrounded by stone wall. It was not the official capital of Canada, and that was York. But as a second prong would also cross the St. Lawrence River. A third prong would leave, Third American Army would leave from Detroit, march across and capture Toronto, which was serving as the capital of Canada. So 3 American armies moving across the Canadian border, capturing the Canadian capital, basically capturing the largest city, Quebec, capturing the waterway, St. Lawrence, and basically you would have Canada captured. That was the plan in 1812, the American plan. So here's what happened, actually. The First American Army near Chicago managed to actually cross the river and started to proceed to Toronto. But there, they saw a huge British army. And so the Americans retreated back to their fort at, well, excuse me, I said Chicago, it was Detroit, excuse me, at Fort Detroit, and closed the gates. Of course, what they had seen was large, and it did seem like an army, but it wasn't. So Canada was busily making uniforms for Britain to send across to, for British soldiers. So they had a lot of uniforms. They didn't have a lot of British soldiers because most of the British soldiers were fighting against France. The people of York simply had their citizens put on the uniform, and then they had their citizens march up and down the roads near York, which gave the impression that there was a huge British army there, which there wasn't. So now the Americans have closed the gates of Fort Detroit, and now the Canadians, along with some of their Indian allies like Tecumseh, surround Fort Detroit, basically cut off their food supply, and the Americans have to surrender Fort Detroit. Meanwhile, the other 2 American armies, they just don't even cross the border. They're militia units. And as they gather together, they say, hey, our job is to defend New York. It's not to actually go invade anyone. Besides, this is a stupid war. So of the 3 American armies, so to speak, 2 of them don't even cross the border to invade Canada and basically just go home. The 3rd American Army, small American army, is actually captured at Fort Detroit. So in 1812, the American plan to capture Canada completely fails. So the invasion of Canada really failed because of lack of support from New England. So a lot of troops, a lot of there were, of course, again, there weren't many Americans in the West over the Appalachian Mountains. So the nearest large number of people were in the New England area, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, for example. And those people didn't show out at all. Those militias didn't show up at all. Why? Because New England thought this was a stupid war and is not supporting it. So the invasion of Canada failed because of a lack of support from New England. So that brings us to 1813. 1813 is basically spent getting back the land that we lost in 1812. So it's basically spent getting back Fort Detroit. So the Americans do round up more men, and they do basically approach Fort Detroit. And after a brief battle, the Canadian forces there retreat back to Canada. The American army follows them, and it follows them to a place along the Thames River near York. And there at the Battle of the Thames, the Canadian militia and their friendly Indian allies, led by Tecumseh, try to stop the American army. But it fails. In fact, Tecumseh is killed in the Battle of the Thames. And the death of Tecumseh ends the dream of an Indian confederation. The American army marches into York and burns it to the ground. Okay, that's it for 1813. Now moving to 1814. So in 1814, basically the Napoleonic Wars in Europe are over. Britain has basically won the Napoleonic Wars. Now it can send over large armies to fight those Americans. So the British plan in 1814 is three-pronged, a three-attack approach. One British army will come down from Quebec, come down Lake Champlain, and capture Albany, New York, splitting off New England from the rest of the country. And if that sounds anything familiar to you, it should, because that was the British plan in the Revolutionary War to win the Revolutionary War. A second British army will sail up the Chesapeake River, stop by our nation's capital, capture it, move on to capture Baltimore, which is a major port city, and then move overland to capture Philadelphia and New York, our major cities. Meanwhile, a third British army, sent by sea, will attack and approach New Orleans. After capturing New Orleans, that means the American West will be cut off from the American East. Because remember, in the American West, there are no really good roads back to the east, and basically the farmers in the American West send their stuff down the Mississippi River to New Orleans and then out to sea. And if you capture New Orleans, the British said, we'll cut the American West off from the American East. So basically, the United States will be cut up into pieces. And then the Americans will have to surrender, and the British will win. So how did that work? Well, the British plan to capture Albany failed because New England sent troops. So now that New England is being invaded, they care about the war. And the New England militia turns out in droves. They really turn out to stop the British army coming down Lake Champlain. And in fact, American military troops from Fort West Point are also used to stop the British advance. In fact, as those troops at West Point and other regular U.S. Army troops and the militia stop the British general looks over and he thinks he's just going to be fighting against militia troops, but now there's some regular American Army troops, and he goes, "Those are regular, by God," which is, by the way, the motto of West Point. So the British Army is stopped and has to go back to Canada. So one of the three parts of the plan didn't work very well for the British. The second part did start to work well with the British. The British did stop by and capture Washington, D.C. Amazingly, nobody thought the national capital would ever be attacked. Duh. I mean, who would think of a thing like that? Well, the British did. So when the British arrived in Chesapeake Bay, there's only a militia around Washington, D.C. Now, the militia basically go out and try to stop the British Army, and in fact, the President of the United States, James Madison, comes out to give them support and leads some troops in battle. It's the last time an American president ever, it's the last time an American president has led troops in battle, in combat. But of course, the British Army breaks through anyway, and Americans start to retreat from New York. Start to retreat from Washington, D.C. The president's wife, while the president has been out leading troops, the president's wife has been getting stuff around the White House and putting it in wagons. And in fact, she takes down a very famous portrait of George Washington. It's the last thing she takes down, puts in a wagon, and then she heads off on that wagon out of there. The British troops arrive in Washington, D.C., arrive at the White House to find supper on the table. I mean, things had been so rushed that the Americans had to retreat so quickly that the supper had not been served, and so British troops stopped to eat, but they also stopped to do a few other things. So in retaliation for burning buildings in York the year before, the British soldiers burned public buildings like the Capitol building, the place where Congress is meeting, and they burned the presidential mansion, and they also burned the Navy Yard. But just as the fires start, a terrible storm comes up and basically lasts several hours throughout the night. And it must have been a horrific storm because the British soldiers that wrote about it all basically said the same thing. And it says, God's wrath. That is, God is apparently not pleased with what we've done because he's trying to kill us with this weather. So apparently there are a few tornadoes in the area, and the rain fell heavy and thick. British soldiers just hid in buildings throughout the night. And then next morning they marched out as quick as they could back to their ships. So the fire that was started at the White House and the Capitol were basically put out by the heavy rains. Now, eventually, of course, they had to repair the White House. And eventually, the old saying is that even that when they restored the White House, there was still some scratch marks left over the war, and they started putting white paint on it to sort of make it look like nothing had happened. And that's when it became known as the White House. That's the legend. But I think actually it's been called the White House a few years before that. But from then on, almost everyone referred to it as the White House. Meanwhile, the British ships had now sailed towards Baltimore. And they were especially anxious to attack Baltimore because Baltimore it was a shipping area, but it was a port. And some of those ships had been used to attack British merchant ships. So the American Navy wasn't really big. It only had about 12 small ships called frigates. And so many American merchant ships were armed. They had a few cannons. And so those few American merchant ships would go out and stop British cargo ships who had no cannon, because one cannon beats no cannon every day of the week, and would seize the British merchant ship and bring it back to Baltimore where the cargo would be sold. And so the British Navy was really anxious to capture Baltimore as a port to stop these American ships from attacking British cargo ships. So the British Navy arrives and they offload the same troops that had attacked Washington, D.C., and those troops start to go down the road to Baltimore. But the militia at Baltimore is ready. They've been building barricades, and they have snipers along the road. So as the British march along the road, they're under constant enemy fire. The British get about halfway to Baltimore along the road when their General Ross, is shot and killed by one of those snipers. And that really takes all the fun, so to speak, out of this attack. The British eventually do manage to sort of march a few more miles, but then they see that there's like a big wall that's been built in front of Baltimore using cotton bales and other things, and they see there's a lot of defenders behind those, and the British Army says, we don't have enough troops to break through that. Let's have our Navy break through. And so the British troops march back down the road, get on their transports. Meanwhile, the British Navy will try to sail into the bay and capture Baltimore by sea. To do that, they have to pass by Fort McHenry, seen here. So Fort McHenry is a very strong fort. They knew the British were coming, and they had prepared accordingly. So, however, the fort's guns were basically short-range guns. That is, basically, the fort's gun were designed to fire straight ahead to anybody trying to get in that narrow channel. They could blow those people up. But their guns really couldn't shoot out to sea very far. And so the British Navy had longer range guns on its warships. So the British plan was simply to stay out of the range of the fort and simply basically bombard the fort until it gave up. But just before they started, a couple of Americans arrived on board the main British warship, the command British warship. And these two Americans were lawyers, and they had been hired by a family of a doctor. So a few days early at Washington, D.C., this doctor had been arrested and accused of killing British troops. But the family had gathered evidence to show that the doctor was actually saving British troops and treating British troops who had been wounded. So the family had hired these lawyers. The lawyers had gone around to some of the British soldiers that had been left behind because they had been wounded. And the British soldiers said, oh, no, that doctor wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to save my life. And, oh, yeah, that doctor treated me. He got that bullet out of me. And so these lawyers were now going on the British command ship to meet with the British general, the new British general, and admiral, to secure the release of this doctor. One of them was a very young lawyer named Francis Scott Key. But the admiral looked at these papers and said, okay, you're right. It appears that the doctor's innocent. It appears that he was trying to save our lives, you know. So we're going to set him free. But unfortunately, we can't set him free today because you've been on board our ship. You know our plans. If we set you free, you might go tell the fort and the people of Baltimore what we're going to do. So we're going to have to keep you here till after we win the battle. So all through the day, the British ships fired at these forts, at the fort, Fort McHenry. And all through the night, it fired at the fort. And the next morning, the shooting stopped. And the two Americans, the doctor was still below, came up to look to see what had happened. They looked us over at the fort to see whether there was a white flag or not. The day before, there had been a huge flag that had been specially designed for this battle and for this fort. But now they look over and see whether that flag is still flying. I mean, there's two reasons why the shooting has stopped. One, either the British have given up, or two, the fort has surrendered. Unfortunately, it's sort of foggy out. And because of all the gunpowder floating around, it's really difficult to see over the fort. It's just at sunbreak, and it's hard to see, and there's fog and dust in there, and the fog and dust is all going around, and all of a sudden they see, Francis Scott sees something. And what he sees so moves him. It's so emotional that he pulls out an envelope and a pen, and he starts writing down what he feels. And what he wrote down becomes our national anthem. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous flight over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. Notice, by the way, there's question marks there. It's a question, and the question is our flag still flying? Is the flag that we saw yesterday when the sun went down, that American flag, is that the flag that's still flying? So it asked the question several times, is the flag still flying? Is that flag, that star-spangled banner, yet waving over the land of the free and the home of the brave? And then the next stanza answers that. On the shore, dimly seen through the midst of the deep. That is, we're looking at the shore from the ocean. We're looking at the shore from the ocean where the foe's haughty host, where the warships are now in silence. And this is, what is that which the breeze over the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses. So now the wind comes up and starts to move the clouds and starts to move the smoke away. And Francis Scott says, what is that? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam. Its full glory reflected now shines in the stream. So as the wind blows the clouds and smoke, and all of a sudden the sun strikes it, and what is it? 'Tis the star-spangled banner. Oh, long may it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. So the Americans had won, and the British had given up. Key writes a third verse, which is basically taunting the British. And where is that group who were swearing last night, that were telling us that the havoc and war and battles, confusion at home and the country leaves no more? So the night before, the British soldiers and sailors were going, ha, tomorrow we're going to march into Baltimore. Ha, tomorrow we're going to take your home. Ha, tomorrow the United States is going to lose. And he's going, where are you now, huh? Now that we won, I don't hear you now, huh? And then he goes, their blood has washed out their foul footsteps pollution. That is, you guys stink. No refuge, no place of safety could save the hiring enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. Ha, we won, you guys lost. Oh, and the Star-Spangled Banner, in triumph does it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And then the fourth verse is giving credit. It's thanking two groups, two people. One, oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved home and war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven rescue land. Praise the power that had made and preserved this nation. So first of all, Francis Scott Key thanks God. Then conquer we must when our cause is at just. In other words, he's saying this is a just battle. This was a battle worth fighting. And so this be our motto, and God is our trust. Oh, and the Star-Spangled Banner, in triumph, in victory shall it wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. So we get our national anthem out of the War of 1812. Meanwhile, the third British group is headed towards New Orleans. Just about this time, in 1814, Andrew Jackson is a general in the Tennessee militia, and he's leading militia troops and some regular forces against the Creek Indians at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. So the Indians in Mississippi and Alabama area had sort of risen up, and some of the Creek Indians had, joined with the American forces. Other Creek Indians had said, no, we're going to try to fight and keep our land. And now Andrew Jackson has been commanded to come out and lead the militia and put down the Indians. And he's in the process of doing that when he gets a letter. And the letter basically says, Jackson, stop what you're doing. Get to New Orleans, get out everybody you can, because we think the British are headed. It's from the War Department. We think the British are headed there. You have to defend New Orleans. So Andrew Jackson basically wins the battle very quickly at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And then he takes his soldiers and his militia, starts, interesting enough, he doesn't head directly towards New Orleans. Instead, he heads towards a small port along the coast where he thinks the British troops are going to perhaps land or attack. He gets there just in time for the British fleet to appear. The British fleet, seeing the Americans are there, they don't even try to land their soldiers. Because remember, these soldiers have been at least a month at sea, so before they attack, they need to get their land legs. They need to, practice walking around. They need to get used to being on land again. And so the British plan had been to land them on the Gulf Coast and to exercise them for a few days before they took them to New Orleans, but now they can't do that. So now Andrew Jackson immediately starts headed towards New Orleans. Meanwhile, at New Orleans, off New Orleans coast, there's a small group of islands, one of which is called Batavia, and there's a pirate base. The Lafitte brothers, Jacques and Jean Lafitte, the most feared pirates in America, the most feared pirates of the Texas Gulf Coast. They attack any ship. In fact, their pirate base is huge. It has several thousand men. It has several major warships. It's not like a warship and 50 pirates. It's a huge naval base. And all of a sudden, one day in 1814, they're sitting there, and a small British ship appears and sails right on up to the pirate base under a white flag. The British officer gets out, walks up to the Lafitte brothers, and says, "Look, I have a deal for you guys. We're about to attack New Orleans. Now, we would like to basically sneak in. We know the Americans are going to try to defend it, but we'd like to sneak in from the rear. And we British know that you pirates know exactly where to strike. You guys know New Orleans like the back of your hands. You know where every weak point is. So if you pirates would lead us in the back way so we can take New Orleans without heavy casualties, we will pay you a pirate's fortune. We will pay you an astronomical amount of money." And the Lafitte brothers go, "Wow, that's a pretty good deal. Yeah. Let us talk this over with our pirates, because we're not their kings. We're just their leaders. So and we'll get back to you. We'll send a ship after you guys. So you guys go. You sail to your fleet, and we'll in a day or two we'll send our answer after you." And once the British officer sails away on a ship, the pirates get together, and the Lafitte brothers says, "Let's go warn those Americans." And the Lafitte brothers, Jacques and Jean, arrive in New Orleans. They arrive at the governor's house. They sneak in, and later that day, the governor comes home, and when he opens the door, he finds the Lafitte brothers, the most feared pirates of all. And the pirate says, "Don't worry, governor, we're not going to harm you. But we have news. A British fleet is coming to New Orleans to take it. And governor, we know we're pirates. We know we're wanted men. We've done bad things. But you know what, governor? We're American pirates, and we want to fight for America. So, governor, we'll bring all of our weapons and all of our men and help you defend New Orleans. The only thing we ask is that you don't arrest us. We'll help you fight. Just please don't arrest us." And the governor goes, "Excuse me, guards, guards, seize these men." And in a scene worthy of a Johnny Depp movie or whatever, the pirate brothers, speed out of the house, run across a few roofs and lose the soldiers behind them. But nevertheless, when Andrew Jackson arrives at New Orleans, he realizes he's going to need every person he can get. And so he accepts the Lafitte brothers. And the pirates will fight for Americans. So it's a motley crew he has to defend New Orleans. He has some militia troops. He has some regular soldiers. Now he has some pirates defending New Orleans just in time. And basically he builds a wall. He knows the British have to offload their troops at a certain place. And then they'll have to cross a little canal, the Rodriguez Canal, before they get to New Orleans. And behind Rodriguez Canal, he builds a wall of cotton. And he places his few cannon there. And sure enough, a large army, 4,000 British troops, start to march up to the wall. And on January 8th, 1815, the battle will commence. It's been both sides on the night before, both sides are sort of gearing up. But come that day, the British commander has a plan, because he's been there several days. He's noticed that the cloud cover is really, really low. I mean, it's like the fog is like descends on this place until a certain time every day, until about 8 o'clock every day. The fog is really heavy, which means the British commander's plan is to march his men across this open field right up to the bales of cotton, put his ladders in the bales of cotton. His men will climb up the bales of cotton, and then just at 8 o'clock, all this other stuff has been done before 8. At 8 o'clock, as the clouds start to lift, his men will then climb over the cotton bales and kill the Americans. So January 8th, 1815, that's about what happens. There's thick cloud cover, there's fog on the ground. The Americans behind the cotton bales, they can hear the British troops coming, that they can't see them to shoot. But just about halfway across the field, just as the British troops are marching halfway across the field, all of a sudden, and I'm quoting from the British general's letter, as if on cue, one of the British generals that is, as if on cue, the fog rises early. And now here's the nice British army lined up in lines with their nice red uniforms, with sunlight beaming right off of them, and naturally the Americans just open fire and slaughter them. Basically kills half the army, including the commanding general. The rest of the army packs up and leaves. It's a great American victory, the Battle of New Orleans. Unfortunately, too late. The war's actually been over for a couple weeks. So ever since the war first started, Americans and British have been trying to figure out how to end it. So American diplomats had arrived, and normally they, of course, would go to Paris, France, where all the treaties are signed, except there's a war going on in Paris, France. So they go to a place called Ghent, Belgium. The English people, the English ambassadors meet them there, and so the Americans and the British start to think about ending the war. But of course, in 1812, the Americans don't want to end the war because they know they're going to capture Canada and get that, but they don't. Then 1813, they said, "Oh, okay, I guess we okay. The British, why don't we talk about peace?" And then the British ambassador says, "No. Because 1814 is going to be our year. We're going to split your country into so many pieces. It's going to be awesome. You guys are going to lose New Orleans. You're going to lose everything." But then, by late 1814, news has come that those first two parts of the British advance have not worked. And now with the Napoleonic Wars over, there's no need to stop American ships going to France. There's no need to seize American sailors. And so basically the causes of the war, there are no causes of the war. So by December of 1814, the British and the Americans agreed to a peace treaty. And basically the peace treaty says, we'll just go back to the way things were. That is, neither side loses or wins. Neither side gains any land, neither side loses any land. We'll simply go back to the way it was. And then they put that news on the ship going to America. Unfortunately, of course, the ship takes a month to get there, which means by that time the Battle of New Orleans has been fought. So winners and losers of the War of 1812. Of course, a big winner, the United States. It has fought a superpower and hasn't lost, and has actually won a couple of major victories at the end. Andrew Jackson, a big winner. He becomes a hero, a war hero, and war heroes who run for president are almost always elected. And we'll see that he'll be elected president. And interesting enough, Britain is a winner. And of course, you're thinking, well, how can that be? You know, a war has two sides. One wins, one loses. Duh. No. In this war, both sides turned out to be winner. Of course, Britain's a winner, not just because they won against Napoleon, but also because there's a little clause in the peace treaty. And the clause in the peace treaty says that from now on, if the United States and Britain have problems over something, instead of fighting about it, they'll sit down and talk about it. So within just a few years, there's a dispute about warships on the Great Lakes. And Britain sat down and talked about it, and they decided, why have warships along the Great Lakes? In a couple of more years, there's a talk about boundary problems in Canada. They sat down and talked about it, worked out the boundary. And so instead of fighting about the problem, time after time after time, the British and Americans sat down and talked about it. And eventually, as countries, they become good friends. And as a result, the United States helped save England in World War I and helped save England in World War II. And English and British troops have been fighting side by side ever since in almost every war or skirmish that you can think of that the United States has been in. British troops have generally been along our side. And so that's really good. Now, there are some losers of the War of 1812. And one of the losers is the Federalist Party. So in New England, that's the base of the Federalist Party. George Washington, John Adams, the Federalists who wanted a strong national government, who wanted that strong industrialized America. Of course, that was New England. They were starting to have the factories. They were doing the ones shipping. They were the commercial people. But when the war starts, New England, and the Federalists in New England, they don't want to take part in the war. They actually think it's a DR war. It's a Democratic Republican war. Let them fight it. So remember the first when we invaded Canada, New England troops didn't show up. It's only when Britain attacked New England that New England troops actually fought. Now by 1814, actually, things don't seem to be going well for America. Sure, we stopped the British invasion from Canada, but our capital has been burned, and America's running out of money for the war. And it seems the war might go on forever. And now, with British troops released from combat from the Napoleonic Wars, the ports are still closed down. New England can't get any ships in or out because of the British warships. Now the British have more armies they could send over. So the Federalists said, no, we have to end this war. And the Federalists in New England sent down a group of people to Washington, D.C. to talk with James Madison, the DR. And basically, they were just going to say, hey, look, Mr. President, if you don't end this war, we people in New England, we're going to secede. We're going to leave the United States. Now, just as this group was arriving to threaten the president, first of all, news about the victory at New Orleans arrives. And it's a great American victory. And everyone going, yay, yay, we won. Of course, the Federalists are going, well, don't worry. In a couple of weeks, they'll realize that the war's still going on. They realize that we still can't get supplies in. They'll realize we're broke as a country. Pretty soon, they'll realize that, that this war, that we're going to lose. But within a week of New Orleans information comes another message. The war has been ended. Neither side won or lost. Neither side lost any land, neither side gained any land. The war is over. And now the Federalists, not only do they look like idiots for trying to threaten the president, saying we're going to leave if you don't end the war. Now they look even worse. They look like traitors. And Americans, we will vote for idiots. Oh, we voted for a lot of idiots. But Americans won't vote for traitors. And so basically, this is the end of the Federalist Party in America. Another big loser, the Indians. Again, ever since the Europeans arrived, the Indians always had one European power to help them out. Somebody had helped them out. But now in this Louisiana Air Purchase area, Well, the French aren't going to help them out because the French sold the area. And now the British agreed to stop selling guns to the Indians. And so now the Indians won't have British help either. So the Indians will be on their own against a growing, expanding United States. And of course, that's going to end badly as far as the Indians and their land. So the War of 1812. Of course, you can probably guess why it was called the Era of Good Feelings, the time period of good feelings. But the time period after the War of 1812 was called the Era of Good Feelings because we had won the war, we hadn't lost the war, and we had won that last major battle, the Battle of New Orleans, and that was awesome. Plus the fact, because there's only one political party left, there's less political arguing. There's really no one to argue with because there's only one political party. So Americans start referring this time as the era, the time period of good feelings. Feeling good after the War of 1812.